was a couple of years ago. This was a party that had just come out of an anti-Semitism crisis. He was trying to show that they are people who, have dealt with a significant problem with regarding how they treated Jewish people, and that was the sensible line to take. In government, and certainly after the last election, I do think that they found things a lot tougher. There is a separatist Muslim vote that has been cropping up all sorts of places. There are about 5 or 6 of them in the House of Commons now. Everybody talks about the Reform MPs who won. Nobody talks about the sectarian group of people who are sitting in our parliament. And we're seeing this across the country in local elections as well. I was quite astonished by some council results where the campaign was just vote for the Muslim, not for the party, and they won in Lancashire. This is quite disturbing. You have ministers like Wes Streeting and Jess Phillips who, if not probably for the Conservative vote, would not be here. Just very, very paper-thin votes against that sectarian vote that's cropping up. I think they're worried about that. I think also, just going back to the point I made about the moral courage and the moral clarity, they don't know what they think about a lot of things. And this is all getting very complicated. They don't know where to go. We see it in the way that they think about the economy. We see it in the way that they think about policy across the board. Their views are student politics. Oh, we don't like these nasty Tories, and once they go away, everything will be fine. But how to fix things, how to solve things, they don't really know, and that's why they're floundering.
But your own party, you're actually challenging your own party if you look at previous policy too. I looked up when Donald Trump caused the death of Soleimani in 2020, the first of these type of assassinations. Guess what? The Foreign Secretary, who was a Conservative Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said we must de-escalate. So it would seem to be a sort of permanent condition of British policy towards Iran that we must de-escalate.
Well, remember what I said earlier, Charles, that these things are written by officials. The officials haven't changed. The government may have changed, but the officials are still the same. And it's the same person who probably wrote de-escalate for Dominic Raab is still writing those same notes. This is what happened when Rachel Reeves did the silly thing with winter fuel. We had seen that policy come up year after year. It's a shelf where they bring down old ideas that people have said no to. And the same person probably brought down the same folder and gave the same idea, and she grabbed it with both hands. And this is why one of the things that was at the heart of my leadership contest was talking about the bureaucratic middle class. Talking about officialdom doesn't mean that civil servants are evil or good. It's just about how we go about doing things in a way that's just a conveyor belt of the status quo. And we haven't tried to change things in a very long time. And it's time that we start changing.
To be fair to the government, it is a very difficult situation when you have President Trump, isn't it? Because you don't know what's going to happen next. So you have to keep on keeping your options open. I mean, what do you think actually... I mean, you're very strong always on Israel's rights in these matters, but what do you think actually a British government should do about handling Donald Trump?
So, yes, I've never been shy about my support for Israel. I think everyone in this room probably knows very much how I feel. And that has come from watching Islamism globally just spread its awful tentacles everywhere. Just this morning, we saw Christians being murdered in Damascus. That happens in Nigeria, where I have a lot of family. So I feel very strongly about Islamists and just people pretending that it's the same as just any other sort of threat. It is coordinated. It is very dangerous, and it's here in the UK. So I start from the position of what is in the British national interest. What is in our interest? Who are our allies? Who has shared interests? And very much so, the people who do have shared interests are Israel, the US, many of the countries in Western Europe who are dealing with this, whether it's France or the Netherlands. What is the right thing to do? It is to stick together, show some moral courage, show some strength, but not cross lines. I don't believe that lines have been crossed so far. I don't think that we should have waited until Iran finally got its hands on nuclear weapons before deciding to make a decision. Sometimes de-escalating does require preemptive action. I think that that's the right thing to do. What worries me is that clearly our government is not trusted by our allies. Both the US and Israel have said so, not quite so many words. And that is a very, very dangerous place to be. because it means that they don't know what's going on. And if they don't know what's going on, they cannot plan. We need to be very plugged into what's happening with our allies and across the rest of the world.
So is that the implication of what you just said, that we are now being cut out of intelligence because we're not to be trusted?
That is my suspicion. I can't prove that, but that is my suspicion from the comments that the Foreign Secretary himself was making, just the reliance on the bland sort of let's de-escalate. I don't feel that they know what's going on.
Thank you. I don't want to come back to this in questions, but I'll just go to the Thatcher comparison, because of course you are in a situation which is not completely different from Mrs. Thatcher's, not in 1979 when she won, but in 1975 when she became leader. And you'll probably find it a comfort to know, Kemi, because you have been criticised quite often in the last year, that the obloquy thrown on you is extremely like that thrown on her at that time. And I have cause to know that because I've just been rereading my own book in order to shorten it. And the sort of things that are said about Mrs. Thatcher in 1975 are very, very similar to what is said now about being narrow, not knowing enough, not being confident or having the right tone in the House of Commons, being not knowing enough about the world. They're basically, I suppose, if you had to characterise them, I'm trying to avoid the word sexist, but they're certainly patronising. I wonder, you will of course have thought about this, and I'd be very interested in your take on how you, which must partly involve the study of her, is how do you look at all that and how do you get beyond that?
So I'm somebody who's quite sanguine about criticism. To be a politician is to be criticised. You don't go into this looking for love or praise because no one is ever going to give it to you. And it's interesting hearing many of those comments about Mrs. Thatcher, but she's not the only leader of the opposition that has had that sort of criticism. It has been levelled at pretty much everybody who has done this job, because that's what people do to the leader of the opposition. And it's quite important to keep some perspective. History doesn't, you know the phrase that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I do think it is rhyming. But I also saw in Theresa May and Liz Truss everybody rushing to say, oh, this is the new Mrs. Thatcher. That every time there is a female leader of the Conservative Party, people rush to think that it is, it's Thatcher reincarnated. I am not Margaret Thatcher. She is a heroine of mine, but so are many other people. I'm very much me. And we live in an age that has some similarities with 1975, the lack of confidence, a Labour government that doesn't know which way the wind is blowing, a party that probably feels more comfort in doing things the way it always did, rather than finding a new path, being radical and just changing things. That's really what I want to do now. I want to change everything. I've been reading Patrick Cosgrave's book, Margaret Thatcher, a Tory and her party, and at the end of it says she changed everything, and it's quite a painful thing to have to do. Nobody likes change. It's very uncomfortable. Until the change actually arrives, the process of it, many people find really difficult. And that's one of the things that I have to do, just show that the Conservative Party can stay authentic to its principles, but actually be relevant for 2025. What I see happening so much now, and I see it with Labour as well, is everybody wishing that it was still 2005. And that we can just say the things we said in 2005 and the world can be like it was in 2005. And if we're just really nice, really, really nice, and just, don't scare the horses, everything will be okay. I don't think everything will be okay just by being nice. I think we're going to have to take some very, very tough decisions. You look at the debt the country is in, how we have got here. Every single party has got its hands dipped in the blood. How do we fix it? No one has an answer. We're just hoping it'll disappear. So much that has changed since COVID and the war in Ukraine. We need to change a whole load of things. But we can't do it in a way that people don't understand. And that is my biggest challenge, trying to chart a course without destabilizing both my party or looking like we're going to destabilize the country. That's quite important.
On the very day that she won in February 1975, Mrs. Thatcher said, "You don't exist as a party unless you have a clear philosophy and a clear message." I assume you would agree with that. So what's yours?
So I have many. This is the thing. So which one do I pick today? So my philosophy has always been rooted in personal responsibility. The things that make certain countries work well and others don't, are about people taking personal responsibility, starting with family as a unit, but also empowering those people who build things, who make things, who grow things, to actually strengthen the economy. That we will only work if we have, that the country will only work if we have more people providing the prosperity than those who rely on it. And what worries me is that the rider is getting heavier than the horse. I talk about makers and takers. There are people who are making the country, who are making society, and others who just feed off it. And the extreme example many people think of is those on benefits, but it's everything. It's rent seeking. It is a corporate and even a private sector culture that relies on government, relies on regulation for it to create advisory fees. All of this is just sucking the life out of the country. So the people who I'm for right now are really small business more than anyone else. Big business can sort of take care of itself, but small business, those people who set up a shop on the high street, those people who are farmers, for example, people who they just need to be left alone to get on and do the thing that they need to do. The government is strangling them, whether it's with regulation or tax. It is not creating a business environment where people actually just want to go out and take risks. We are trying to get to a zero risk environment which will destroy growth completely, and someone needs to fix that. And that's really what we are trying to reshape. That it's not just about cutting the pie into smaller and smaller slices and distributing the crumbs. It's really about growing. And it may sound cliche, but growing something bigger, something different, that is fit for the future, not just trying to replicate the past.
In the intervening years, particularly in recent years, the free markets that Mrs. Thatcher propagated and advocated have been rather discredited quite often in public conversation. When she came in, she was trying to revive them. Would you say the same today, or do you need to give a rather different account of how economic success works and how economic success benefits people in general, not just successful people?
So I think we must always make sure that we're talking about how, whatever the economic philosophy is, it's going to benefit everyone and not just a select few. But one of the things I firmly believe, this is another strand of the philosophy, is that we need to stop being naive. I gave a speech in December to the IDU about how we allow ourselves to be exploited, whether it's on the asylum system, allow our kindness to be exploited. The same thing happens with the economy. I'm very much a free marketeer, but free markets and capitalism only work when people play by the rules. And there are a lot of people who have not been playing by the rules. Why is it that free markets are discredited? You look at what China has been doing. Take steel as a classic example. There is a global oversupply. China is subsidizing, it is dumping, it is doing all sorts of things that the WTO says it should not be doing. And it's getting away with it. That's one of the reasons why the US walked away from the World Trade Organization. They haven't really been participating properly. China breaks the rules, many other countries break the rules, and we're still playing by the rules. If you're playing a game where you're playing by the rules and others aren't, you are being naive, and that is when people start to lose confidence in the game itself. What we need to do is start enforcing rules. And we've just seemed to have stopped enforcement across the board, whether it's internationally, whether it's domestically with crime. Shoplifting has effectively just been ignored. We don't go after people. And so many criminals believe that they can get away with things. And if people think that they can get away with criminal behavior or just bad behavior, it will grow, it will continue. And then it becomes even harder to police. And we need to do something to arrest that decline. It is very, very much a visible decline that you can see in our cities, London in particular, but elsewhere as well.
So what's the Badenoch philosophy about globalization? Because on the one hand, globalization clearly created a great deal of wealth and was part of the great changes of the late 20th century. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it's blamed by many people for the financial crisis of 2008-9, banking crisis. And the idea has come about that there's a sort of Davos class of person who's done very well out of all this globally, but somehow that doesn't include the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, every normal citizen.
My favourite people. Yes.
And, so can you give a sort of post-Thatcher account of how you can help those people? Is it fundamentally different in some way from 50 years ago, the argument that has to be made, or is it, are we working?
So I would probably characterize it as being more thoughtful about the losers. Whatever happens, whatever system is chosen, there are winners and there are losers. And one of the reasons why globalization, privatization, free markets, whichever one of these things you want to pick, one of the reasons why they have been become less popular is because there have been very visible losers who seem to have been left behind and no one cared. We saw it, even during the miners' strike. It was quite clear that this was an uneconomic thing that had to stop. But there so much energy was spent just dealing with the situation that a lot of towns just ended up feeling like they were left behind. This was what the levelling up agenda was trying to do before COVID completely kiboshed it. But it is about being thoughtful when it comes to losers and not just assuming that they'll sort themselves out. The raw theory of free markets is that creative destruction, jobs will be lost, and then people will go off and find other things. That's fine for a large cohort of people who, the people who are very mobile, they can do lots of things. But if what you're doing is fixed to a place, whether it was mining or textiles or something that was very much geographically rooted, it's not that easy to just get up and go and find something else. It's not that easy to leave your roots. And we need to find a better way of dealing with those situations where people who are fixed to a place suddenly lose the thing that has made that place prosperous.
One thing that I think Mrs. Thatcher was very good at in relation to economics, probably the best ever actually, was making them understandable politically. So that she basically said, all these men, and she made a point about her sex in this, she said all these men have been fooling you with jargon over the years about prices and incomes policy and things like that. And it's all gone wrong, and they don't know what actual life is like. And we women, and she used an out-of-date word now, we housewives, know about this because we deal with weekly budgets. And she sort of dramatized the whole situation. How, you can't and shouldn't attempt to do the same thing in the same way, but how, I'd like, I think we'd all be very interested in your account of how you, Kemi Badenoch, came into this. She would say, I'm a grocer's daughter, I saw it all across the counter, I saw the accounts at the end of the week sort of thing, and also I'm a housewife's mother, etc., and I understand these realities, the realities of inflation. Tell us a bit more about where you come from in your life that has persuaded you of these verities and how you apply them to current reality.
So on the economic side, it hasn't. Being a woman has not really had an impact on my views. Most of my views have come from having my childhood in a place where stuff just didn't work, and seeing that it was many of these failed ideas, government getting involved in everything, lots of socialism, etc., etc. That's what stopped those things from working. It wasn't because people there weren't clever, or it wasn't because they didn't have communities. It was because institutions kept failing, because they weren't supported, and the institutions were trying to do things that they should not have been doing. So a lot of my strong views, whether it's on energy and net zero, if you have ever grown up in a place where you turn the switches on and the lights don't come on, or you open the tap and water doesn't come out, you start to get very serious about energy security. More so in a society like ours, where most people don't have any kind of backup. When I was growing up, there were candles everywhere, people had generators, they had fuel, they dug boreholes. If something happened and we suddenly lost electricity in the UK today, we would not be able to survive as well as most third world countries who have backup systems in place. So it worries me when I see people messing around with energy policy because they've just never been in a situation where they had to worry about it. If I was to talk about where being a woman has had an impact, it would be very much more on the social and the cultural side of things. When I think about a lot of the work that I did as a qualities minister, looking at young children coming into my office talking about being sterilized because they had problems, and the medical professionals and all sorts of counselors just allowed this to happen because they didn't want to look like they weren't trendy and they weren't with the fad. That's had a significant impact on me. I have 3 children of my own. The abortion vote, for instance, which we had last week, I found quite extraordinary. I am pro-choice. I'm very pro-choice, but I thought the law was fine where it was. And you start to wonder what is going on when we call things conscience votes, when actually there's a safeguarding element that's coming into it. It's particularly pertinent for me. 2 of my children were born at 38 weeks. So the idea that that was just fine for them to have been terminated, as somebody who is pro-choice, I just find deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I look at Parliament and I see a lot of people who are there who don't know how to fix anything. They don't know how to get growth. They don't know how to fill potholes. They don't know how to sort crime. There's loads of them. And so they start going into areas where it's completely cost-free. They can just put this legislation in, pretend it's 2005 or 1965, and think that they are, being, liberal, but they're actually creating problems. And they also are people who don't think about those who are not like them. Many of the problems that we have in our legislature are people who make rules for middle-class people who have loads of choices, have loads of black backup plans, and they never think about the person who is living a life that is very different from theirs. You think about those people who I've seen in my constituency surgery who get abused. They're not the ones who are ordering pills by post. They're not the ones who decide to take them. Just all sorts of horrible things happen. A very extreme example being the grooming gangs, where a lot of stuff was overlooked because people just couldn't comprehend how something like that could happen because it wasn't people like them that were being impacted. And I'm doing this because I'm thinking about people who are not like me, who may not have been as lucky as I have been. I've come across them, and very much being a woman and seeing a lot of the problems that women are impacted by is one of the reasons why I feel very strongly about many of those social and cultural issues as well.
Actually, you're talking about negative impacts, interestingly, both in social and in economic questions, which is interesting. I'd like to take you up on the net zero point. And again, you've got quite a burden to shift with your own party on this, given the policies.
I don't think so.
Before, no?
I don't think so.
Well, what is the policy now then?
That net zero by 2050 is not possible. A lot of these plans just don't make any sense. Even the government is realizing it. It's announced an industrial strategy today, which is a copy and paste of our advanced manufacturing plan, which we put out about 18 months ago, with a few tweaks here or there. Almost anything that looks reasonable that the government has done is probably something that they copied and pasted from what we were doing. The bad stuff's got nothing to do with us, I can assure you. It's got nothing to do with us at all. But they can clearly see that something is going wrong. We are deindustrializing. Energy is far too expensive. So what we're doing now is looking at what is the root cause of this? How can we adjust the policy? So there are things like the energy profits levy, which is killing oil and gas. 10,000 jobs have been lost in the industry since that levy came in. That tax is cannibalizing the industry. So we have to stop looking at tax like a linear thing, that you tax this, you get this amount out. It's not just the Laffer curve. It's about dynamic effects, the behavioral changes that come from putting these taxes in. Energy profits levy is one of them, talking about the oil and gas licenses, which we'd put in. We need to start thinking not just about how to get cheap energy, but also how to make sure it is as secure as possible. And that means using many of our resources. We are now importing oil and gas from the North Sea in the same basin, just on the other side of the border from the Netherlands, while stopping ourselves from drilling there. That is not a sensible policy. It is not coherent at all.
Your story is an unusual one because you're British born, but then brought up most of your childhood in Nigeria. And I wonder if that means that, unlike the majority of people's Britishness, Britishness in this country, you've actually had to make a choice, and you've chosen for Britain. And you did that when you were young, I guess.
Yes.
That's interesting to know why and what that means. There'll be increasing numbers of people like that in this country, and also people who did not have to make that choice will be very interested in you making it. How does it affect how you see this country? What do you think is really good about it, and what's wrong about it?
So our country is very rare, and I don't think it is something that is appreciated enough. And being in opposition often means just constantly talking about all the things the government is doing wrong and all the things that are going wrong in the country, and you end up getting quite sounding quite negative. But I'm not a negative person. I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of this country, and that is because I think that so much of what we have here is amazing. Even just look at me sitting here as leader of the opposition. That would not happen in most places around the world. That would not even happen in Nigeria. A Nigerian woman cannot even give citizenship to her own child. And just seeing the way that this country allows people just to be who they are. It's not about your background. It's not about what race or ethnicity or what religion you are. It's about what you can do. A meritocracy. I think that that is really phenomenal. And meritocracy is one of the principles that I really value. I think that we don't talk about it enough. I think we've ended up in a situation where we've been embarrassed about feeling that those who were always successful were a particular elite, and we threw the baby out with the bathwater. We can do both. We can champion people from all backgrounds without having to descend into the sort of socialist collectivist mindset, which has started bringing all sorts of bizarre sort of, positive, it's called positive action. It's really affirmative action. Mm-hmm. It's positive discrimination. It's quite often illegal. Most people are too scared to challenge it. But reading adverts that say that we only want Black, Asian, or ethnic minorities, that is very wrong. That's what happens in places like Nigeria. And a lot of people are blindly accepting these things, and they think that it's great, but it's not. We should go back to the thing that made us who we are, which is judging people, as Martin Luther King said, not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And that's something we don't talk about enough these days, about character.
Your party has a very big problem, which Mrs. Thatcher didn't have, which is that it has a big rival on the right. And one reason it has a big rival on the right is on this type of issue, because particularly on immigration, the Tories were way behind. Well, indeed, you could almost say that reform came into being, well, partly because of Brexit and partly because of immigration, because immigration absolutely forged ahead in the Tory years, and people began to realise that it was uncontrolled, and on that scale, uncontrollable if you just let it continue. So you're now behind in the polls and behind on the policy. How do you deal with that? When Mrs. Thatcher had a very slightly similar problem, she only really needed to use one word to quieten it down. She used the word swamped. In 1978, she said people feel swamped by immigration. And you could immediately see the poll move in her favour about 6-9 months before she actually won. Now, it doesn't work like that now. You have to say something much, much bigger, and the problem is much, much bigger, and you have a big rival about it. So what do you do?
So this is one of the things where I think there are only so many lessons to draw from what happened in the 1970s. We now live in an era of multi-party politics. It's not like it was in 1975 or 77. It's not like the US. It's not just reform. You have the SNP in Scotland, for example. The Green Party is doing a lot better than it ever did. It's got representation in Parliament. I talked about those sectarian MPs. What is happening is a deep fragmentation of our society, a deep polarization. Some of it, not all of it, some of it fueled by social media. There being fewer and fewer shared experiences, lots of people in their various echo chambers, whatever they may be. And the baggage which I have, which Mrs. Thatcher didn't have, was a long period, 14 years, of Conservatives in office, 5 of them in a coalition with Liberal Democrats, another 2 or 3 in a hung parliament. But people don't notice that for quite a lot of those years, we didn't actually have a majority to drive through an agenda. But on immigration, that's one of the areas where we just have to cauterize the wound. And that is why we have come out with much tougher policies. So stopping the conveyor belt to British citizenship, it's far too easy. Rules that may have worked in 1950 or even 1980 when I was born don't work now. We live in an era of global mass migration. We're not the only country that is dealing with this. I remember going to Italy 2 days after 8,000 people landed on the island of Lampedusa. Lampedusa's only got 5,000 people on it. We're not the only people dealing with this. But the fear of talking about immigration in any way that might sound xenophobic has held us back a lot. We've campaigned on immigration in 2005. I remember seeing posters saying it's not racist to talk about immigration. We didn't win on that. I remember Theresa May getting very heavily criticized for having vans that had go home driving around the place. I mean, what was actually probably not very effective and quite a mild thing was treated as if it was the most horrific policy ever. And so many MPs, many Conservative MPs, took lessons from the way the media talked about it and actually even from the way that the public responded to it. The tide has now turned very quickly because of the scale of the numbers. We need to show that we have changed and we recognise that. So stopping the conveyor belt to British citizenship, things like indefinite leave to remain, tightening them up, making sure that nobody who comes to our country ends up being a net beneficiary. People should be contributing. If you need social housing or if you need benefits, then you shouldn't be here, and so on. And that's where it gets to things like disapplying the Human Rights Act and the work that Lord Wolfson is doing on the Convention on Human Rights. What would leaving look like? What would we have to do? We are doing the hard work, the foundation work that has to be done in opposition, because if you don't do that now, you will end up in government like Labour has, with no proper plans and just being blown off course or blown wherever the wind blows.
You stopped perfectly at the 40 minutes
Right.
of our conversation, and we now very grateful for that. We now throw it open to the floor, and I will take the questions. Could you please say who you are when I select you? There's a lady by the window, her hand's very high. I think a microphone will come your way. Of course, I reserve the right to disallow questions or amalgamate them or whatever.
Director of the Family Hubs Network. It's great to hear you, Kemi. Could you unpack what family policy that is predicated on personal responsibility might look like? And very quickly, I could not resist asking you, what would a government you lead do about Islamism? So two very different questions and two very big ones. Sorry about that.
Okay. Do you want me to take them one at a time?
It's up to you.
Right. So family policy with personal responsibility for me is about understanding and recognizing what the role of the state is versus parents. The children thrive best where there are two parents and where they have a stable family unit. And you only need to look at the prison population, where 90%, in fact more, of the prison population did not grow up with a father in the household, to understand just how much impact the sort of family you start out in has on your life chances. I don't think that is controversial. But then what do you do with that? That's where the policy comes in. Some of those things that we're working on in our policy renewal program, but we also need to look quite a lot at the things that we have done which haven't worked. Multiple interventions. I remember when I was a minister in the Communities Department working on the Troubled Families program, and it all seemed very piecemeal, very interventionist, one family at a time. But the government couldn't really get those families. It just couldn't get those families to be whole. And we spent a lot of money. And I think that we need to start looking more at the prevention side of it. How do we make sure that people don't start families that are unstable in the first place? I don't think that government needs to get overly involved in that. Society, and there is such a thing as society, needs to have some form of supporting families as well. I think this is one of the things that we have to think about when we look at welfare policy. If we're going to change our welfare system, what does that look like? How do we make sure that there are other things that can come into replace? It is very complex, and it is not easy, especially for those of us who think that the state has a limited role to play and should only do those things that government can do. How we make sure that we create an environment for stable families requires a lot more work around integration, but so much of what we've been doing has not yet made a difference. Looking at childcare, looking at what's happening in schools, in education, it has to be cross-cutting across multiple departments. And on the second question about what to do on Islamism, I think that we just need to have the bravery and the courage to call it out when we see it. It gets muddled up with so many things. You try and point something out, and people accuse you of Islamophobia, for example. Not having a ridiculous definition of Islamophobia is absolutely important. I always said that the definition of anti-Muslim hatred, talking about specifically hatred towards people of Muslim heritage rather than the religion itself, was a good place to start. The Islamophobia definition that the government is consulting on would not have allowed us to probably start the national inquiry on grooming gangs, for example. So we need to be very, very careful about allowing lots of things to seep in under the guise of, being nice and trying to not upset anyone, but actually they're making it impossible to police and enforce norms in our own country.
Thank you. In the white shirt, is that Aubrey Allegretti? Is that?
Thank you very much for the introduction. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times. Kemi Badenoch, in 8 days you have the chance to potentially inflict Keir Starmer with his only defeat so far of this Parliament when he brings forward reforms on welfare. Will your party vote for them because you think that the size of the welfare bill needs to be brought down? Will you vote against because you don't think they go far enough and potentially the political damage that could be caused to the Prime Minister because of that? Or would you abstain? Thank you.
I'm not going to give Labour my full battle plans for what we're doing on welfare. I think people have heard many of the things that we've said. They should keep a close eye, is all I would say for now. But thank you, Aubrey.
Michael Stephen there. Yeah, microphone will come your way.
I used to be a Conservative MP. I don't have a problem with inheritance tax, simply because I don't have a huge sum of money to give to the next generation. But there are people who have a problem with inheritance tax because it is a very dangerous and a quintessentially socialist tax, because it dismantles family businesses and estates and transfers power to the state. And in addition, it's a mighty disincentive for people who have got a lot of money to give to the next generation not to stay here and invest it and spend it here and pay taxes here, but go off to some other part of the country where they don't have to pay. And as it only generates 0.7% of tax revenues, why don't we just not reduce the tax, but get rid of it?
So it's an excellent question. Why did we not get rid of it all of those years? If you asked the chancellors of the time, they would have said we couldn't afford to get rid of it. You look at, and this is one of the fundamental problems, you look at what is happening in terms of spending, the deficits, which we cut every year until COVID started growing again. We're spending £100 billion just paying debt interest, roughly about another 100 billion on the deficit. And so there is a simple tax and spend cost calculation which is being made. But I think that we need to take a further step. We can see, for example, that the changes to inheritance tax which Labour's brought in, the family farms tax, the family's business taxes, are actually cannibalising small businesses, family farms. People are changing their behaviour. Farmers are committing suicide. I was at the Lincolnshire agricultural show on Thursday, and the machinery suppliers have said nobody's buying anything because they're afraid of buying equipment that costs £250,000, what a combine harvester would cost, and then that becomes something that ends up getting taxed where they've got an 85-year-old parent who owns the farm. We have to be able to understand the situations, the lives, the lifestyles of people who don't just work in a 9-to-5 and live in a terraced house somewhere. And I think there is a lack of understanding about the implications of inheritance tax, which have not fed into policy. So one of the things that I've said is that we're going to abolish the new changes that Labour has made. They won't make any money. They're very distortive. They're harmful. And we need to look at a whole suite of taxes across the board. This is why I have said that what the Conservative Party wants to do now is radical change. We want to rewire the state. We want to reprogram it. What we've been doing over the last 20, 30 years is tweaking. We'll take 2% here, we'll add another 4% there, we'll change this thing, we'll abolish that. It's just not enough. We need something that is wholesale and different, and that takes time to work out. But this is one of the very issues that many people have raised, and it's not wealthy people who are talking about it. It's often young people who feel that they are not able to have the same start in life as previous generations. They have university debt that is burdensome, wages are more or less stagnant, the opportunities aren't there, it's very hard for them to do anything, and then they've got this tax on top of them as well. And that's one of the things that we need to tackle.
Right, I'll take Daniel Johnson and then Noah Hoffman, please. So Mike's coming your way, Daniel.
Hi, Kemi. Daniel Johnson, The Article. You've said that the assisted dying bill, which passed last week, is a bad bill. You've also brought some excellent new people into the House of Lords, and there are people like Charles and Dean here already there.
Are you making a pitch, Daniel?
Well, no, I'm just saying, how are you going to use your troops?
For me, by the way, I was.
Yes, but how are you going to use your troops in the Lords to try and, at the very least, mitigate some of the damage that this bill is going to do?
So I think this is one of the questions that that I like the opportunity to spell out a little bit more of my thinking on, because my positions tend to be quite nuanced on these things. I have always been a supporter of assisted dying. In principle, I had a great aunt who died in the most horrific way, and I saw that assisted dying would have been right for her. But you look at the way that this bill has been drafted, rushed through, the way the committees have been selected, the dropping of the safeguards, and it's all done in such a way just to shove things through and in a thoughtless manner. There is too much thoughtlessness in our legislative procedure. There are too many people who are creating laws so that they can put something on social media and say, I did this, rather than look at the ramifications of what the legislation that they're putting through are going to have. And I have serious concerns about that. It's the same with the issues I raised around abortion, that you can support an issue and yet know that this is not how you do this is not how you legislate. That's what happened with net zero as well. A 90-minute debate that has cost us hundreds of billions of pounds, and nobody even had a chance to vote on it. We need to stop legislating like this. And I'm trying to put people in the House of Lords who are deep thinkers, who don't rush into things, who don't have a need for this sort of narcissistic, I wish I was in showbiz rather than in the legislature, how do I get myself on TV? That's what's driving so many of these behaviours. We need people who can think, and that's what I really want to see improve across the board, both in the Commons and in the Lords as well.
Thank you. Noel Hoffman, please. Have you got a mic there? And then Harriet Lyne, please.
Hi. Thank you. I'm Noah Hoffman from The Sun. Kemi, I was wondering whether you take any inspiration in terms of integration from Denmark's so-called ghetto laws, where areas or municipalities where there seems to be a lot of sort of socio-economic decline and a lot of issues with integration and a build-up of people who can't speak the national language that's the government then forces people to move to ensure that there is always like a mix of different cultures and to stop this sort of build-up of ghettos. It's been touted by a lot of people as quite a success. Is that a policy that you would look to follow in any way?
I have looked at it, and it's one of the things that I'll be talking about more. That until now we've had what I call passive integration, that people come into the country probably in small numbers over a long period of time, and it's very easy to absorb and in fact I think integration is not enough. I say assimilate. I think assimilation should be the target. If people don't assimilate, then they integrate. But we've had so many people, so high numbers, people from lots of different places, which is not what immigration used to look like. And I think we need to move from passive to active integration. That's something which is along the lines of what you were describing in Denmark. We need to do what works for the UK. It's not exactly the same situation. We have a much bigger population and so many other things that would require adjustments. But that sort of thing, yes.
Harriet Lyne, please.
Thank you. Harriet Lyne from the Daily Mail. You criticised the Foreign Secretary for being unable to say whether the US action in Iran was legal. Do you think it was legal, and if so, why? And could you just expand a little on your comments on Lord Hermer and why you think his position is untenable?
Well, I don't need to expand on it. The Shadow Attorney General, who's actually sitting in the audience, has written a brilliant explanation of why this action should be legal. So I would recommend that you look at that. That is our party position. I don't have anything further to say on Lord Hermer. I just don't think that we should have somebody who has these sorts of views. This is not about the cab rank rule or anything like that. Someone who has actively taken positions which I don't think are in the national interest, and who has clearly given some advice, which the government understandably doesn't want to talk about. We didn't always talk about our legal advice, but that has put the Foreign Secretary in a position where he cannot answer a question. I think that is wrong.
Robert Shrimsley, please, and then Ian Bruce.
Robert Shrimsley from Financial Times. Given one of the phrases that we heard a lot in the last government was the phrase "the active state." Given the size of the state now and the scale of debt to GDP, I'm curious to know whether it's a phrase you believe in, and if so, what are the parameters you use for saying when the state should be active, particularly in the economic and business sphere?
So it's not a phrase that I would use because I think it's quite ambiguous. What does it mean? When it comes to defense, yes, I want an active state. When it comes to policing, yes, I want an active state. I want to see a state that's enforcement. When it comes to football regulation, no, I don't think that I want to see an active state there. And yes, you know, it's a trivial example, but the cumulative impact of all of these trivial examples where the state is sort of mucking in, getting involved, starting things, not quite finishing them, those things are creating quite a lot of bureaucracy that are slowing things down. And people often ask me, oh, well, what would you cut? What would you cut? It's about doing things just differently. Doing things differently is what I want to see us, is where I want to see us get to. I think that if we do things differently, it's quite clear when we want to see an active state. The state should do things that people cannot do for themselves. That's the baseline. That's where the personal responsibility comes from. And we want the best people that we can possibly have doing those jobs. That's the meritocracy. Family should be at the heart of it. Stable families help create stable communities, etc., and we can go on and on. What worries me is when we see a government that believes that it can solve everything. That mindset itself is so dangerous. And we saw it during COVID, where we tried to create a zero-risk environment. We ended up spending hundreds of billions of pounds. And, you know, in many cases, it was right to do so. But there was no thought for what comes after. How do we manage this? And this was having someone like Boris Johnson who didn't want to go further. I remember Keir Starmer saying that he wasn't doing enough, he wasn't locking down enough, more people should be locked down, there should be more severe penalties, and so on and so forth. That's what worries me. It's the mindset of believing that central planning and more regulation and more laws will fix everything, when quite clearly it won't. We need to give people a lot more of the autonomy and decision-making back.
Ian Bruce is online. Is he there? No, he's fallen off. Yes, in the front row here, or second row, yes. Thank you.
Hi, Kemi. Kate Harris from LGB Alliance. I love your optimism. I had a very depressing incident yesterday with a young relative who said to me that it was more important to be kind than to deal with facts. And I think that is the be kind plague. One of the things that Mrs. Thatcher didn't have to deal with is that plague, which I think has delayed the inquiry into the grooming gangs and has certainly put a glitz on the fact that the biggest medical scandal of sterilising children who are mainly gay and lesbian has been promoted by public servants, counsellors and the medical profession. But I think perhaps the worst thing of all that she never had to face is that you're in a parliament which seems to be heavily populated with people who do not support the rule of law. And without the rule of law, how can you govern? And the example I'm thinking of is the backlash against the Supreme Court decision on the 16th of April, which ruled that sex in the Equality Act meant biological sex. So I believe that you're faced with the biggest moral challenge of my lifetime, because I'm now 70 and I have never seen parliamentarians actively undermine the rule of law in this country. And I am deeply worried. What's your response to that?
So, Kate, thank you. I know a lot of the background to what you've spoken of. And I remember when I gave my maiden speech, it was 8 years this month, actually, I gave my maiden speech. And I talked about how we're moving away from the age of reason into the age of emotion. And a lot of what people are doing is driven by feelings, not by facts. I am very much someone who starts with the facts. This is a disadvantage in today's modern political era. It is a disadvantage, but I do believe that it will win in the end. There's only so much that you can lie about before the truth will out. There's only so much of avoiding reality that you can do before it smacks you in the face. And I do think that this is what's going to happen to a lot of the people that you're talking about. The Supreme Court has given a judgment, and we have people from the public sector right into Parliament saying that this will be ignored. It is against the rule of law. And what we should have is a Prime Minister standing up and saying, I believe in the rule of law, this is what the law is, everybody should follow it. It's quite clear that he didn't know what he thought about the issue. He was waiting for the judgment, and now it's come out. He's hiding behind it, but he's not enforcing it with gusto, which is what I would do. But reality will always bite. So have faith and have hope. I think that the tide has turned on this issue. This is the end of the beginning, and it's all going to, it will all work itself out. But it does require a lot of brave people continuing to challenge it, just like the news presenter who refused to read the fake phrase that she was given on television. But we have to look at where all this is coming from. And I think it does start with what you said. The be kind. Of course we should be kind, but we shouldn't be stupid at the same time. These things, they can go together, being kind and being smart. And some of it, I think, has to do with the way we raise our children these days, a lot of the helicopter parenting. Sometimes I catch myself doing it with my children. It's one of the reasons why I say families and how families parent so important. Because if we teach our children that being kind is the most important thing, rather than doing the right thing and sometimes having to do tough things, then they will end up in a world where they don't want to experience any sort of tension, any sort of conflict, any sort of friction. Our tolerance for conflict as a society has dropped to very, very low levels. And it's not pushing for conflict, but if you can't tolerate it, if you can't absorb it, then actually you will end up in some really awful situations where conflict was the only way to resolve them. And that's one of the things that does need fixing.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm going to exercise Chairman's privilege to ask one more question, because I feel I let you off a little bit easily on reform.
All right.
Because surely I can see that you're trying hard to remedy it, but you're behind, aren't you? They managed to get a series of hits, which got them lots of attention, made them very popular, and won them by-elections and council elections and so on. So how are you really changing that, and what's the essence of what's wrong with them?
Right. So we are not Reform, and we will never be Reform. Reform is a party that tells people whatever it is they want to hear and to get elected. That is how we got ourselves into the mess we are in now. We said we were going to do things, and then we didn't deliver them because we had not thought about how we would do so and what the consequences would be. Immigration being a classic example, where it was just something we'd work out later. Labour has done the same thing, which is why they are floundering now. They didn't have a plan. They also made promises that we're not going to tax working people, we're going to look after pensioners, winter fuel is safe with us, and they ended up breaking them. That is what is creating so much of the apathy and distrust that the public has with politicians. And then we have another party that doesn't have the history or the baggage that the two main parties have, that's doing the same thing. The cycle is being repeated. We have to break this cycle, because unlike before, we do not have a cushion. We do not have any money. Look at the deficit, you look at the debt, you look at the situation that the country is in, and you look at the things they are promising. Unworkable policies. They want to increase the child benefit cap. They want to nationalize steel, something that the Chinese and the Indians have failed to make a profit out of. And I've talked about the global trade situation. They want to raise the personal allowance to 20,000. They haven't figured out how to pay for all of it. This is not serious. Somebody has to be the adult in the room. We are the adults in the room. And sometimes it's not popular to be the adults in the room. Sometimes, people only want to hear about how we're going to have candy and sweets. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to have a plan to fix so many of these things. But I do know that in the time being, reform may be popular, but I have to do what is right, not just what people want to hear. Otherwise, we will never get ourselves out of this mess. People have asked us to team up with Reform. They are not a centre-right party. They are very left-wing. Otherwise, they would not be winning all those Labour votes. They talk about nationalisation and more benefits. Those are not Conservative policies. So people need to think very, very carefully about what is going to happen in the future. And I remember someone saying, oh, Mrs. Thatcher didn't have a Nigel Farage. But when I was reading Patrick Cosgrave's work, it's contemporaneous, since 1977, he wrote about Jeremy Thorpe and said that everybody was worried about Jeremy Thorpe, this tall, handsome man who looked like a Conservative, and he was taking their donors. Reform is not even taking our donors. We are outraising them, and we have done 3/4 successfully. She had someone that she was worried about, and he was a genuine threat until the thing with the dog happened. So, sometimes you do need a bit of luck. You do need some events, but you also need a plan. And we have a plan It is not a populist plan. It is the right plan for the country. And we're going to do all of the deep thinking now while Labour is in charge, so that when the election comes, we're ready. We have to be ready. And we're going to change everything.
Well, I got the headline out of emerging from this thing, which is Kemi accuses Farage of shooting dogs. It's a brilliant comparison with history, Kemi. And thank you. I think it's been a very stimulating conversation, and you've been very frank with us and very clear. And in that, I detect qualities which got another woman who led the party a very long way. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.
Half three. It's quarter past. Quarter past three. Yeah. Quarter past three. I think, unless I'm being told quarter past three for a half three, but what I'm aware, quarter past three. That's when agreed. You coming to us? I'm sleep deprived, to tell you that. 3:15, he's going to rock up. Yeah. Handshake around 3:20. Oh, no, mate. Okay.
There's many a thing like that, isn't there, really?
No, not recently. Last one I went on was Hungary. Maybe there's a couple more coming up. Oh, it's some decision now. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Good, good. Busy? Busy? Yes. It's very busy. Like the summer. Thank you. I feel like I should have covered my shoulders. Good. But, yeah, I'm definitely the coolest person alive. Stop. Busy for you? Always something. Yeah, it's quite busy. Good. Thank you. Alright. I'll see you soon. Can we get a coffee, maybe?
Elliot, so no car will be there.
Oh, okay.
But I think I'm clean from this point, so.
Yeah, okay. I don't.
Full side.
Yeah. It's all right. There's no dates. Well, it's probably a tool, so I guess they just got it. There's a lot of people that didn't do. But you could have been outside and just watched it.
Fingers up for us.